the death of art to be continued.
Oh, shouldn't we feel sorry for the image maker? What a lonely position. Let's see. I should put something there. In retrospect, I gotta go. Yeah, well, you gotta zoom? There, we'll give you that left eye. That right hemisphere. Can you get the pupil? My right eye can't see this well. You look like a 3D movie made. Just getting on one hemisphere. All right. Where did art start? Well, the creative process started for me a long time ago. Juxtaposing, painting from a very young age, doing photography from a very young age. This excessive energy and dissipating it in some fashion. Well, I started off, I guess, trying to comprehend science, but it was too boring at the time. And philosophy was more towards what I found interesting to do and do without being told, or something I could always do without being told too. After philosophy, I wandered through a lot of different things. Hung out with some Buddhists, hung out with the Taoists, Hindus, ashram. Took a lot of time just to think. During that time, though, philosophy was growing intensely in me, and the philosopher's stone of the day was the brain as the final frontier, possibly an answer. Inquiry started out in a historical one, searching what had been said or thought of the brain, moving to the contralateral theories of the 70s and hemisphericality, mapping and location at the same period. They were finding out that the brain seemed to be the ultimate storage. The split brain theory came along and defined metaphors for our right-handedness, our left-handedness. We search etymologically, we find the brain and the left have always been considered gauche or off-key, the right with the language and the word righteous, the right hand of God. So right's pretty powerful. Who's right, who's wrong? Well, if you're right, you're right. But right's only a small part of a whole brain. And that was with a split brain theory. I mean, they were dealing with half brains. And there are many half-brain people unless somebody took a scalpel and cut your corpus callosum in half, which is what they did their research on. It became disillusioning after a while, though. But during that period, trying to understand neurophysiology and its relationship to consciousness, and how history and art itself was kind of like a depicting of this handness. Mavericks, Julian James and the Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, lay out entire theories of consciousness and how hemisphерicality and right and leftness and metaphors and functions of different hemispheres progressively led to the consciousness that we know. But it fascinated me for a long time, right to the point that it was neurophysiology, in other words, right down to the cellular structure, to see if consciousness could be had down there. But it kind of ended up, after 10 years of studying the brain, looking and thinking it was the philosopher's stone, the frontier, the breakthrough point, the point that maybe new knowledge of what man is and the way man perceives himself to be might emerge. Well, like all things, it just ended up a 3-pound gelatinous lump on top of the head that Aristotle called the cooling system. Well, it's a lot more than that, but that's about as much interest as I have in it anymore. Progressively, I feel the philosopher's stone is changing anyway, and the stone now is becoming apparent by the investigations into theoretical physics, and then the relationships between theoretical mathematics and the Tao-Te Ching, and then the coincidences of the I Ching and the genetic code, and the system of calculation and deduction and divining from the I Ching. Western science started to pick up that. Let's see how I will put that. The paradox and investigations into paradoxical mathematics. Now it's history changing to paradoxical mathematics. Now, things can be, cannot be. Western man now is going beyond the point of either or. He now is inclusive and go either or, but not much etymologically or linguistically, but was a giant footstep for somebody intellectually. The idea of science starts to work itself into my work on a metaphorical level, and zoomorphic, anthropomorphic, but the ideas, like for instance this piece here, it's a complete spiral, piece spirals completely. It starts and it twists and if you look, there's a figure coming out of the head, and this figure's pregnant, and its hand has just released something, and it's a ball that this one caught. This one is my kind of concept of the next generation of fertilization, of passing the law of insemination, of how the genetics. I mean, this is a copy of this, but then its potential is in the sphere. I like spheres because the sphere is a finite system. And I think that my life has moved into a finite universe. The thing with physics that started to grab me was the concepts of a fourth dimension. At first, buying into Einstein's fourth dimensional concept of time being another dimension. But then there was things that were playing that were going beyond just 4 dimensions. Theoretical physics, they were up to 21 of them, 21 in some cases. The fourth dimension started to interest me. And that was when these pieces came along. These were kind of like exponential gravitational field collapses that would somehow indicate that time moved, that space bent, and when space bent, it was because of mass and formation of mass, and the formation of things was always a curiosity for me. Why mass? What are the origins of mass? Where does mass come from? I mean, physics tells us that mass is the small, that we know as of things or objects or descriptions is the smallest stuff in the universe. So, we don't know much about the smallest thing, so how would we ever know about the largest? Kind of skipped a bit. These are some conceptual pieces here that were done. My conceptual mind has always kept up with the mainstream of the categorization of art history, the art history of the modern period. Well, we're in a postmodern period now, and it really, I don't know, I mean, I use modernistic materials and things because it's very hard to go beyond the modern period, because modern period even goes up to lasers. I did some work that dealt extensively with lasers, but the postmodern period has always bothered me, and this is a piece that followed. This was the second piece in this series, and it was called The Death of Art to Be Continued. And what it does is it just says that we're doing the same thing over. I mean, you look at these are black skulls, and the prefrontal cortex areas are painted with particular artists, Paul Klee, Picasso, and on top of those two, Edvard Munch, just screaming, the existential additive to the warping and bending and abstraction and geometricizing and synthesizing of space. But we're not going beyond these people, and we're not going beyond material, so it bothers me. So it's like that art has died for a while, but it's like on a respirator or something, and something has to emerge. I was hoping, in a way that the Duchampian, the Kossuthian models of intellectual development and art being intellectual and being more toward idea, and maybe even combining idea and process to where the idea is the process is the demonstration of nature or the physics that involve it. At least that's my goal, my personal pursuit in terms of working out something. I work with a lot of different materials. This is stainless and aluminum. This follows on the torus model, which is a mathematical model of the universe, and of course, it has something spinning out from the center where the mass and density would be the greatest. The sculptures that I've done deal primarily with man in the universe in some way, or man is even possibly a mismeasurement of the universe, because our size and our relativity are made for man-world, but our measurements go beyond world. So man's ability to measure beyond his own self is greater than himself. So there's a mismeasurement that occurs when man tries to measure the universe. I remember in cosmology, going through cosmology, the final thing to learn was that we can't know this stuff. So, this piece in particular demonstrates curved space, man in his relationship to each other in relative positions, mismeasured, what is size. There's sculpture teaches you about size to the point of canonization. Once you learn canonization, you realize that size doesn't exist, basically, that it's a matter of proportion and relationships of proportions is what the aesthetic is based upon. So it becomes, there again, a mathematical on one hand, and it's all geared again towards man as whatever, the anthropocentric or the anthropic or the androgynous, where measurement, you can measure you, you can measure me, and it's a measurement. It's not me or you. We just fit within a measurement. Measurement's a consistent thing. We're not. A lot of these pieces here arose from the multiverse concept that I played with a while back. Multiverse was an interesting idea because universe didn't work anymore. That it didn't seem to be one at that time. It was too many interpretations of the universe to have one interpretation. Maybe they haven't merged yet to the final stage of quantum where everything will merge, but the word universe didn't fit because this is a theory of the universe, this is theory of the universe, this is theory. Well, if all these are theories and none of them, they're having a hard time plugging into each other to create a whole, then there must be multi-universes or multiple universes that are relative to the perception and the intellect of the individual. This I conceived as something starting an exponential expansion of it, and then within the expansions, different movements that occurred within it as they got larger, they collapsed in. It was a raw attempt to create a manifold that would allow time to move in one direction, to still be spherical within a closed contained space, that would try to explain in some sense expanding space, contracting space, and spiraling space off, and trying to conceive that into an orbit axis spin using the metal. I could cast an eighth of an inch to a quarter of an inch pieces, and that would almost be like the skin of the bubble of what our universe really is, and inside would be the dark matter. And then dark matter obviously probably would be on the outside too, and how we can connect to dark matter through collapses or expansions. This all started to occur at the same time with recursive geometry and how fractals occurred and fractalization and branching in nature occurred, which led into a lot of watercolors at this point, because I was experimenting first with fractals. Sonic the Hedgehog, morning, 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 morning. Are you still recording? Oh, you're still on. These were working with fractalization at the time, and also my ability at one point to see so many dimensions occurring within a single thing that grid lines start to appear, mixed media starts to occur, watercolors with watercolor pencil and different kinds of pencils. As fractalization became more apparent to me, I started to realize though that there was a greater level than just the fractals and the the recursive systems of fractalization. And obviously you can see it in nature. If you pick up a leaf, you know it. You look at a tree, you know it. If you look at your veins, you know it. So it's apparent, it's there, the recursive system. But that recursive system, how does that formulate? Well, I started to understand a little bit more about what turbulence was. And turbulence started to lead to, what is turbulence? I mean, it's a positive and a negative, somehow coming in dynamic interaction, a positive and negative, a plus and minus. It seemed like the analog system was just the perfect system. So I wanted to work a little closer with what turbulence and how turbulence would occur. And what were patterns of turbulence? Well, the first things I did were watercolors, where I would set a mist field up, which allowed me a ability to have a wet spot, a dry spot, a wet spot, a dry spot, a wet spot, a dry spot. So as I took and I used a well-soaked brush, I could lay down very thin lines of watercolor and dyes and stains, and what that would do is it would hit and it would go wet, dry, wet, dry. And if you look close into these, you see almost a perfect natural fractalization, because it's a binary system. It only has a wet and a dry spot, so it has to choose and it has to make decisions. Now, what those decisions are based upon, I mean, is the crux of the mystery. Mathematics can give you a formula for it, but so these are all based upon that. And the second ones that came about were basically aluminum sculptures where I would use sand cast and I would create wet spots in the sand, and then I'd pour molten aluminum. And wherever I had wet spots against wet and dry, I would have turbulent interaction, and it would blow these big holes right through the aluminum wherever the steam occurred and blow it up. So as you pull them back out of the sand after they cooled, you could actually see the dynamic turbulence occurring within the piece itself. So here again, the piece was becoming the demonstration of an idea, that it was the proof of. I mean, proof is a funny thing, especially philosophically, but it was a demonstration and a proof in itself that this could occur. In the meantime, lots of paintings occurred, lots of other things occurred, and right now the work is, my personal body work is starting to move more into spatial spiraling in man. So right now I'm working on an anthropological concept with man as mismeasurement, trying to understand how man will reintegrate as a thing that occupies a state instead of a measurement. We've measured ourselves out of existence. We no longer exist. Science has to be dealt with in terms of its metaphorical connotations and how these are going to come across to future man. Man has to understand in some way that we're going to change. And it's because of the theoretical physics ideas and the way they'll affect us. When two things exist at the same time, when things can be and not be at the same time. Consciousness and its relationship and metaphors will change to allow us to have a new world-/universe view. From that view, I'd like to be part of my investigation, because I'd like to investigate things not yet known in the know themselves. The sequence here, kind of into a lot of weird stuff at this point. I mean, that's not heavier. It's all appearance of them and most of the changes around here.
You never appears to be the same. Your glasses are on.
Ooh. Well, that's one of the cheap ones I bought at the thrift store. Trying to find